one of my life lessons, my mantras is I either win or I learn. So I'm not afraid of making decisions, because if things happen the way I want them to, I'm going to win. I'm going to get the outcome I want. And if they don't, I'm going to learn something which still makes me better. And that feeling that whatever happens, I can't lose, makes me unafraid to make decisions.
You are listening to Personal Development Mastery Podcast, providing those with the desire to grow with the simple, consistent actions needed to master personal development and create the life they yearn for. I'm your host, 𝗁𝗁𝗄𝗄. A few years ago, I found myself unfulfilled and unmotivated, like I had lost my sense of purpose and my life was merely passing by. Since then, I've been on a continuous journey of personal development that has transformed every aspect of my life. Now, my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out, and take action towards a purposeful and fulfilling life. In this podcast, I invite myself inside the minds of remarkable entrepreneurs, authors, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, people who share their journey, milestones, and learnings for you to be inspired to grow. In each episode, you will find practical action points that you can implement right now. So make sure you follow the podcast to get them as soon as they are released. Today's episode is about hypnosis, what it is, how it works, and how it can help you. My guest is the UK's most in-demand hypnotherapist. Let's dive right in. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Adam Cox. Adam, you are a clinical hypnotherapist, a radio presenter, serial entrepreneur, property investor, a speaker, and coach. You are also host of one of the world's most popular hypnosis podcasts called The Hypnotist, which has, at the time we record this, over 1.5 million downloads. You are considered one of the world's most innovative hypnotherapists and the UK's most in-demand one, working with celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty. Adam, welcome to Personal Development Mastery Podcast. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
It's an honor to be on the show. Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you for being here. These are these little small introductions are very impressive credential, and also the topic of hypnosis. I personally find it fascinating, and I'm looking forward to shed some light and have your expert opinion about that for sure. Before we go there, I like to start my conversations with some kind of background from my guest, and what I usually ask is a milestone moment, a transition, like a key defining moment in life where things changed direction. So that would be a great place to start, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the key reason why I'm a hypnotherapist is that I had to make a change in my life. And when I was 18, I left home for the first time. I was quite a shy, introverted child. And then living alone for the first time on my own, I didn't have the social skills. I didn't have the emotional intelligence to cope with that situation very well. And what I found is that I would get anxious in social situations. And how I coped with that anxiety is how most people cope with anxiety. And that is that they avoid the things that cause the anxiety. Now, the problem with me is that people, I thought at the time, were the cause of my anxiety. So I started avoiding people. And to begin with, it was avoiding big social situations. And then it was avoiding any social situations. So I became a recluse. And to elaborate on that, if someone isn't familiar with that phrase, I became isolated. I hid away in a tiny room, a bed, a sink, a shower, and that was pretty much it. And I think the key defining moment for me was that I started, as many people do, thinking about the future I was going to have if I couldn't interact with people. And it wasn't a very good future. So at that point, I entertained the idea of suicide because I didn't think it was bearable to live in that way. And the way in which I was thinking, because I had limited, things around me to kill myself, was to jump out of the window headfirst onto the concrete. That was my thought as to how I was going to deal with this anxiety and a bleak future. But I thought at the point where the idea of suicide popped into my head, because I seriously considered that, it then gave me a frame of reference to say, well, if I'm willing to do that, surely I should try anything else but that thing first before I do that. And it set me on a journey where I thought, okay, there must be someone out there in the world that has faced similar kind of circumstances, and I need to figure out what that is. But because I didn't like people, and because I was studying psychology at the time, I had access to a 24-hour library. So I would go to the library at night. I would, alone read books and read about the mind and psychology and thoughts. And I arrived to the conclusion that not everyone in the world, had this feeling around people. And therefore, maybe people weren't the problem, but how I was thinking about people. And it led me down a journey to figure out that actually a lot of my emotions were caused as a side effect of the beliefs and the thoughts I was holding on to. And that if I changed what I believed and if I changed what I thought, maybe I would change how I felt. So for me, my most defining moment is thinking of two different futures. A future where I hold on to all the beliefs that were making me feel really anxious and we're talking my heart beating at 200 beats per minute and all the panic attack, symptoms that kick in when your sympathetic nervous system goes into overload. So that was one future, very bleak future. And then I entertained the idea of a different future, and that was not just not having this anxiety, but a future where I was able to figure out how to make changes in the mind so that what was working against me was actually working for me, that I could change my emotional state and rather than be a victim of it, actually utilize it and have it work for me. So then I imagined a future where I had multiple businesses and I had investments and I had good friendships and relationships and all these kind of things. And that future was so much more appealing. So my defining moment really was kind of weighing up two options, a bleak future where I would, be better off dead, or a future with amazing possibilities. And that really set me on a journey to figure out what happened inside my own head.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I find fascinating the fact that you already at that time, you did have the emotional intelligence to contemplate on the other option and not let the first option suck you down, because I'm sure there were very strong emotions tied with the choice. Was there a point further down the line that you looked back at yourself at that time and said, wow, I've really gone over this. I do have the social skills now. I do have all that.
Oh, many times. Part of the downside of living a life that you didn't feel possible is a feeling of maybe I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
Because now I'm in a very privileged position where, as a result of completely changing my emotional state, I finished my degree in psychology. I worked in a radio station, which lots of people, they were doing media degrees. I did psychology degree, and yet I'm working in the radio station. And then I worked in a different company. And then at the age of 23, I set my own company up. And then at the age of 27, through the success of that business and certain investments that I did, I was a self-made millionaire at the age of 27. And at each milestone, I thought, well, there was a future where I was either dead or just kind of completely alone in a tiny bedsit. And that gave me a huge amount of gratitude. So that I think sometimes when people get a taste of success, it can bring arrogance, it can bring cockiness. But for me, because I had that reference in my life of, well, through a bit of luck, I was able to figure this out, and not everyone is. Maybe I was an addict. Maybe I was still a recluse. Maybe I was completely dead. So it gave me a sense of, many times throughout my life, I think even when I'm going through tough times, as an entrepreneur, there are always challenges. There are always stressful things. And yet it's difficult for me to be hit that hard, because when I compare my life with what it could have been, I feel like, well, yeah, all these problems that come from are a blessing in a way, because I'm fortunate to have a quality of problem that relates to, the challenges of being a business owner or an investor, or, if I lose £20,000 in a day, I'm grateful that I have enough money to lose 20,000 in a day. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a different parallel universe, there's a version of me that would love to have enough money to lose 20,000 in a day. So it gives me perspective on life.
It's a very powerful perspective, especially looking back at what could have been. So it's great. Thank you for sharing that. And moving a little bit further forward, what made you want to go into hypnotherapy in particular? What was the decision or the change at that time?
Yeah. So when I figured out that I was creating all this anxiety as a teenager, it was obvious to me that this wasn't a conscious decision. I wasn't choosing to feel this way. It was an unconscious response to a combination of things like beliefs and what I was focusing on, and recurring thoughts, compulsive thoughts, and I wasn't choosing any of it. So it was obvious to me that actually I had to make changes at the unconscious level rather than the conscious level. And luckily I was able to make those changes. And then, when I made those changes, I was then very driven to have all the things that I didn't have as a very shy, introverted, insecure teenager, materialistic things, kind of, a nice car, a nice house, watches and things like that. And I built a business, and I built a property portfolio and various other things. And I reached my mid-30s, and, on paper, from the outside world in, I should have been happy guy, because I had a relationship, I had children, I had not just one, but several businesses, I had investments making me money. And therefore I should have been over the moon with kind of contentment, except it felt that something was missing. And, for me, I was, it's difficult to have made big decisions in your life based on intuition and then not follow that intuition. So my intuition was saying, something isn't quite right here. And then I play detective and start thinking, well, what are the things that I really think about, just because I want to? And it was psychology. It was about how people think, how people make changes. And, I was reading a book, and it was about, having multiple streams of income. And I thought, well, I've got multiple streams of income. Could I have one more? And if I could, what would that be? And it was this idea of pursuing a hobby that would also make me money. And I thought, well, what's my hobby? What am I most passionate about? And it was about psychology. And I thought, well, I figured out how to make quite a significant change in my life, that if I hadn't made that change, it would be very different. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could learn something to figure out how I was able to do that and do that for other people. And then literally the next day, or at that point, I found a course online for hypnotherapy. I interviewed for a position the next day, and it was strange at that point, because I interviewed for the London College of Clinical Hypnotherapy, and the guy that was interviewing me was upset that I looked so relaxed interviewing. He thought I should be nervous, and I thought, this is crazy, because you've got a hypnotherapist that doesn't know how to build rapport, that doesn't understand. It would be my choice to do this course. I'm not, he doesn't decide if I'm worthy of the course. But anyway, I did a foundation course, then I did several other postgraduate courses. And although I knew I was intelligent, I wasn't very strong academically up to that point, because I knew I was going to be in business rather than, following an academic route. But here in this world of clinical hypnosis, I was doing postgraduate qualifications, getting distinctions, getting, the top grades, because it came from a place of genuine interest and enthusiasm. And then I got the good grades. I understood the theory, but one of my belief systems is that, certain things you can only learn from doing. Nobody learns to swim by reading a book. So I kind of figured that if I'm going to be a hypnotherapist, I have to do hypnotherapy. And fortunately, I had, almost 20 years worth of business experience at that point. So I was a clinical hypnotherapist academically, but with a background in business and branding and marketing. So I was able to take those skills and do what most hypnotherapists can't do, which is monetize it, actually turn it into a business. So I was able to quite quickly develop a client base. And because I already had the financial resources, I could rent a clinic on Harley Street, the most prestigious street in the UK. And because of that, because of my background in PR, I was able to build a brand around it. I was able to do, free sessions for celebrities in exchange for testimonials, which kind of meant that I was hypnotherapist of the celebrities and I would have the videos to back it up, and various other things that meant that my reputation, my positioning was growing. And it all came from a place of being unfulfilled and then thinking, right, I'm just going to have this one area of my life that is just for fun. And the weird thing now is that I have people trying to tell me that this is another business that I have, that my work-life balance is all off, that, you're always working, you're always doing something. And I explained to them that most people have hobbies that they spend money on. If you follow a football team, you might spend £5,000 a year on like Sky Sports subscriptions and season tickets and all this. Yeah. It just so happens to be that my hobby is hypnotherapy and it makes me money, and your hobby costs you money. So the reason why I fight so hard to articulate that this is a hobby for me is I like the energy of it being a hobby. So even though, my hobby makes more than a lot of full-time incomes, it's still only ever going to be a hobby for me because I like the energy of it being a joy, a hobby, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. And there was a word that you used when you were describing that hobby, and that word was enthusiasm. So I think that is the key in all that, whether it's something is a hobby or a profession or a vocation or whatever it is. If there is enthusiasm in it, that in my mind, it justifies you going all out for it because it is given to you. Enthusiasm, it comes from
it's
within.
Rewarding. It's rewarding. And I think the key thing is that, people that know me know how busy I am. And they say, look, Adam, you don't need to do this. You don't need the money. Why would you spend your free time seeing clients to do hypnosis? Why do you do that? And it's kind of like, because I enjoy it. It's as simple as that. And when you do something from a place of enjoyment, the energy is completely different. And I think my clients also get a sense, my hypnotherapy clients, that if I don't want to work with a client, I won't. Whereas that's a different energy. Typically people that are in the coaching area or change area, they're trying to fight to get a client, even if they don't really think they can help them, because they're thinking of the money first. Yeah. Whereas with me, it's kind of like, I don't need the money. The money's a bonus. So therefore, if I work with someone, it's because I truly feel I can add value to them. I can help them in some way. And, and also, it comes from a place of, I like the challenge of trying to figure out the missing bit or the key leverage bit to change. So it's part detective, I've got to figure out what's the belief system or the cause, the real root of the problem. But then also there's this amazing thing that you get in change work, in therapy work, which is, if you're a builder and you build a house, you get the pride of seeing a house well built. If you're an effective therapist and you can help someone make a change, that their life from that point onwards is on a different trajectory. And therefore you get the pride of feeling like you haven't just changed their life, but you've changed all the interactions that person have with all the other situations. It's a really profound, powerful feeling that you don't get in a lot of other professions. So I guess the key reason, why do I do it? I enjoy it. Why do I keep doing it? It's fulfilling for me. It feels good to do it, and it feels good to hear the feedback of the impact that I've had after I've done it, which becomes an addiction. And people believe that all addictions are bad. No, they're not. There's lots of addictions that are really good. I like making money. I'm addicted to that. I like exercise. I'm addicted to that. I like helping people change their lives. I'm addicted to that. Yeah. And if you're going to be addicted to stuff, why not be addicted to useful stuff?
I want to take a short break from this episode and quickly let you know about something I'm really excited about. For me, having a podcast made a tremendous difference in my life's journey, and I know the kind of impact it can have on one's personal development. And that is why I'm so passionate about helping coaches who are ready to amplify their message and reach a global audience by creating, launching, and growing a top quality podcast, even if they aren't tech savvy and are limited on time. Maybe you have thought about having your own podcast, but you don't want to go through the time-consuming learning process of how to create, launch it, how to record, edit, host, and so on. If you said yes, I have a solution for you, something that takes away all the complexity and allows you only to concentrate on creating quality content. Go to my website, 𝗁𝗁𝗵𝗀𝗄 to find out more and to get your free copy of my guide about creating and launching your podcast. Alright, let's jump back to the episode. That actually brings me nicely to discussing a bit of hypnosis with you. And let me start with something very foundational, Adam, just in case someone listens to this right now. And of course, he has heard the word hypnosis many times, but maybe he or she is not exactly sure of what it involves or what it is. So in a nutshell, can you tell us what is hypnosis and how does it work?
Yeah. Hypnosis is utilizing a particular form of concentration or focus to be able to make changes that you can't normally make. If you think of mindfulness at one end of a spectrum and trance at the other end of a spectrum, when you're mindful, all of your attention is focused on real sensory experiences, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you feel. A trance is when your focus is mainly on internal representations. So, in the same way that I'm seeing you now and you're seeing me, if I said, can you remember your earliest birthday? You might make an image inside your mind. It's still an image, it's still a visual representation, but it's an internal sense rather than an external sense. That's more like a trance state. So a good hypnotist can utilize these kind of trance states to be able to make changes. And one of the key ways that a hypnotist makes change is by linking an emotion to a thought and then suggesting something. So for example, if there's a trigger that someone has that creates guilt or creates anxiety, and you get them thinking of that same thought, but then you introduce a new emotion. So instead of it being guilt, it might be gratitude. And then you condition that enough times that actually the same thought makes them feel something different. There's a saying, and that is that neurons that fire together wire together. Okay, so if you and emotion is one of the key things that do that with neurons. That's why people can remember where they were the day that the Twin Towers fell down, or when Princess Diana died, or when Michael Jackson, because there's an emotional reaction to that thought, and they can then remember where they were. And it's also why you can't remember most of what you were taught in school, because there was no emotion attached to that education. So if you can create a new emotion that interrupts the pattern, and therefore you can create a change. And my job as a hypnotherapist isn't to make random changes, but it's to figure out what's the key changes to make that's actually going to make a difference. You don't want to, go into, it would be like a bad electrician. If the lights aren't working, he goes into the fuse board, starts changing all the wires. No, you've got to figure out the one thing that needs to change and change that one thing and then test if it's worked. And then if the lights go on, great, you've got the result. And if they don't, test one other thing to change it. So as a hypnotherapist, there's a big responsibility to make sure that you leave things better than when you find them. Otherwise, people are paying you a lot of money to experiment on them, and that's not fair. You know, you have there's a responsibility of actually, if someone's paying you to create some kind of change, if they're addicted to something, you need to break the addiction. If they've got compulsive thoughts, you need to make sure those thoughts aren't compulsive anymore. If someone has a phobia, you need to take that anxiety away from the stimulus. There is a responsibility on a good therapist. And unfortunately, there are lots of very incompetent therapists out there, which is why it was possible for me to enter a profession and within a few years get to relatively high, almost the top echelons of that profession, because there's so much incompetency in that area. And I mean, you're a dentist. You probably haven't had someone come to you as a dentist and say, dentistry doesn't work. They might have had one bad experience with a dentist, but they make it specific to that dentist and they say, I saw that dentist, he wasn't very good. They don't generalize it to the whole of dentistry. They do with hypnotherapy. If someone sees a bad hypnotherapist, they say, hypnosis doesn't work. No, you've worked with one bad hypnotist. Find a good hypnotist, and then it will be different. So it's the nature of humans to generalize. So, my job really is to, and that's why I have my podcast with almost 500 real sessions of real hypnotherapy, so that I can provide social proof and say, hypnotherapy works with a competent practitioner working with a genuine client to create change. And if I can just, inspire a few people to say, actually, hypnosis may help them solve their problem, then great. That's useful for me.
Can you give me a couple of common examples of problems that people come to see you about? Let's say a couple of the most common things that they would like to change. Yeah,
I think because I started out in as someone in the background of marketing, I decided to have specializations within hypnosis, and one of those was phobias. I had lots of anxiety as a child, as a teenager. So I've helped hundreds of people with arachnophobia, for example, or fear of flying, or fear of public speaking. And typically within 2 or 3 sessions, I can make that phobia completely disappear. And, it feels difficult for people to believe that's possible, because if you've genuinely experienced real emotions for decades, it's difficult to comprehend that can go in like a couple of hours, but it can. And therefore, I feel like I have a responsibility for those people that are living with unnecessary anxiety. They don't have to keep having it, but they just don't believe it can change. So if I can get one person thinking, actually, I always have that reaction when I see a bee, or I always have that reaction when I see a dog, and they don't want it anymore. Well, a good therapist can remove that relatively quickly. We know how to do it. I say good therapists know how to do it, but there's lots of bad therapists that don't. And that's the problem, because someone might see a therapist and then go away and they still have the phobia, and then they don't realize that it can change. If anything, it increases the learned helplessness, because then they say, I've tried hypnosis, it doesn't work. And then they're stuck with the problem forever, because now they have a belief system that change isn't possible. And change is possible if you find the right person to help you change.
I suppose one other reason that this happens in hypnotherapy is that the result is not so obviously. It's not like black or white. For you said about dentistry earlier, it's much easier to see what's happened and feel, and when you're out of pain or your tooth looks good. So it's work with hypnotherapy. It's not, or with the subconscious, or with limiting beliefs, with things you can't really see them. So what I'm trying to say is that, pardon?
You can. If someone's afraid of a dog,
yes,
and whenever they see a dog, their heart is beating like this, and they're really anxious. And then the next time they see a dog and they don't feel that way, they know.
Yeah.
They know. The problem is most hypnotherapists do not test their work because they're not confident in their own abilities.
Right.
So a good therapist will elicit and try and while they're in front of you, so if you have a phobia of something, I'll say, Aggie, tell me the last time that you felt that thing, where were you? And I can tell from your facial expressions that you're re-accessing that emotional state. Mm-hmm. Then we do the therapy. And then at the end, let's say that you're afraid of snakes. I say, well, look, just to check this has worked, I've actually got a snake here. Now, if you believe I have a snake and you see me going to reach something, if the phobia is still there, you're going to have a really anxious reaction. Mm-hmm. If the phobia has changed and you're like, oh, great, where's the snake? You're like, oh, it has changed. So, a good therapist is eliciting and calibrating to notice if change has taken place. But there's a lot of really bad therapists that don't even want to test it because they feel if they test it and it hasn't worked, then the client is going to be upset and they're going to have to give the money back. Whereas for me, I don't care about the money. So I'm happy to test it because my competency is more important than the money I make from the client. So you can test good therapy just as easily as you can test good dentistry, but a good dentist doesn't mind if they pass them the mirror and they look inside their mouth and they see. But a bad therapist doesn't want to pass the mirror because they're afraid of what the client will find, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. But what I wanted to ask is, are there any situations that are not like black or white like this, that you either have the phobia or you have not the phobia? If it is some other, let's say, more complicated beliefs, is it, does the same thing still apply?
It does, and you're right. There are more complicated issues. One of the most complicated issues, I would say, is obesity. And being overweight.
Right.
And that is because there, in a phobia, typically there is one stimulus and then there is one emotional reaction, normally anxiety. In weight loss, you've got many, many variables influencing that. So you might have emotional triggers that encourage people to overeat. You might have social pressure from friends and family member encouraging you. You're going to have lots of belief systems about what food means. You're going to have habits that have built up over decades because we live in a society where we have to eat every day. You're going to have biochemical elements in the sense that sugar is addictive, alcohol is addictive, they all have calories. So you've got these multivariable things. So some of it isn't just the therapy, it's psychoeducation. And one of the things I have to do as a hypnotherapist is to say, look, this isn't something that's happening to you, it's happening with you. And the metaphor that I use stabilizers or training wheels on a bike. And I said, well, look, if you were just learning to ride a bike for the very first time on two wheels, you might try and ride the bike, fall off so many times that you believe you can't ride the bike. But what would happen if you had training wheels? And they say, oh, it would support me. And I would say, do the training wheels pedal for you? And they're like, well, no. And do they steer for you? No. It's like, well, hypnosis is like the training wheels. It's going to give you support, but you still need to pedal. You still need to steer. You still need to take action. You still need to make decisions. Mm-hmm. It's just that this is going to help you. And what would be crazy is that you have a bike with training wheels and you never pedal and you never steer, because then you're never going to ride the bike. And what I'm empowering them to do is not to become dependent on the therapy, because in therapy can be like personal development, and that is people get addicted to the vehicle rather than the resources. It's a nice way to make money if you can get all your clients addicted to seeing, to having you as a therapist, but it's not ethical as far as I'm concerned. I want to not be the resource, but to unlock the resources within them. And so therefore I'm not needed, because you don't want a client to be dependent on a therapist. But lots of therapists don't think that way. A lot of therapists say, okay, you only need 20 good clients that are, that you're their therapist for the rest of their life. Any therapist that has the intention of being a lifelong therapist to a client, in my opinion, is a terrible therapist, because surely good therapy is about creating a change and creating resourceful, responsible states in the individual so that the therapist is no longer needed. That's my opinion. And I think because I have such strong opinions about this, and because I'm a therapist that doesn't do it for the money, a lot of therapists don't really like what I'm saying because it makes them look bad. I don't care. I feel that the therapy profession, if we were more competent and cared about our clients more, we would all have more clients. There's no shortage of people with problems. In fact, I would flip it the other way around and say, do you know anyone that doesn't have any problems? No. So therefore, we've got nearly 8 billion potential clients in the world, and I think that's why my podcast has done quite well, because people are out there looking for answers and they're not finding them, and then they stumble across my podcast called The Hypnotist, and there I am saying, normally it costs quite a lot to work with me. Here's my therapy for free. And I've not counted the last number of episodes, but I think The Hypnotist has got over 500 episodes. So if you classify, let's say each, an hour session with me is £250. So I'm just gonna get a calculator out here at the moment. So there's 500 episodes, at £250 each. It's £125,000 worth of value that you can get off therapy on my hypnosis podcast. Not everything's going to be relevant, because you might not have a fear of flying, and there's a podcast episode about fear of flying, but the value is there so that someone in the world can find it.
Let's speak about your podcast. Actually, I wanted to ask you about that as well, because you've had a phenomenal success over the last, is it 2.5 years now that you have the Hypnotist? Around 2.5 years.
Yeah, I launched it in April, just after the pandemic. Reason for that is that I was in Harley Street, and then I knew that when the pandemic came, I would have less clients face to face. I couldn't justify the high rents of Harley Street. So, but I still, because it was a hobby for me, not a business, I wanted an outlet for hypnosis. And I thought, I'm going to create a podcast where I create innovative hypnosis sessions with real clients facing real issues, put that out there in the world. And one of my belief systems is around competency, that if you truly are competent, you should put your work out there in the public so it can be criticized, so it can be challenged. And I thought, me putting real hypnosis sessions out there in the public, that I would get a backlash of all these kind of people saying, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. And it was kind of like, I didn't hear anything from anyone, and the numbers aren't small either. I mean, they're big numbers. And I kind of thought, in different professions, you can get found out if you're incompetent. So if you said, I'm a really good cage fighter, I'm really good, I would say, step into the cage, let's find out. Okay. Hypnotherapists, they can say they're amazing because everything is done behind closed doors and it's all confidential, so nobody hears. And I thought, I'm going to be the hypnotherapist that records my sessions while still respecting confidentiality, put it out there in the world. And if people don't think I'm any good, tell me and explain why, so I can get better. Because I believed in the NLP tenet of there's no failure, only feedback. And therefore, every episode was an opportunity to learn, except nobody gave me any feedback other than good feedback. So I thought, right, either I'm naturally quite good at this, or I'm lucky, or there is a fearfulness of giving me feedback because they can't back it up with anything credible. But either way, the more you do something, the better you get. And, the key difference between me and lots of other hypnotherapists that graduated at the same time as me, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of clients, and you get better at something the more you do it. And not only that, I kind of put it out there in the public domain so it can be challenged, so people can say, you're and sometimes people do, not so much on the podcast, but on YouTube, they say, your voice is this and that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is just personal opinion. Some people love my voice, some people hate my voice, and some people like the music backgrounds and other people don't. But there's nothing really constructive. Rarely have I seen constructive feedback. But if I got it, I would welcome it, because then I would reflect on that and think, yeah, that's right. I could try this approach, and also I'm constantly learning. But that's where the podcast came from, was this idea to have an outlet for my innovation, creativity, but also put my work out there in the world. Like an artist that makes art and keeps it to themselves isn't an artist. They have to put it out to the world. And that's going to attract people that love that art and hate that art. And I feel that a podcast is a form of art. You have to put it out there in the world, and then you see people's reactions. And luckily with the Hypnotist, it keeps growing. It's almost 1.7 million downloads now. It's on course for, I think within the next few months, it'll be 250,000 downloads per month. And it generates me clients for free almost, because people hear me and they're like, oh, I love the episode, but I want something a bit more customized to me. And it's like, great. It's a nice, easy way to get clients.
I love that. I liked so much what you said, the word outlet that you used a few times. And I will also second that with my own personal thoughts of podcasting. For me has also been an outlet for expressing myself, for creativity, as you said, for experimentation of trying new things out, seeing how they work, if they don't work, and very importantly, what you also said about putting your work, whatever it is. In your case, it was the hypnotist sessions, but putting your work or your opinion or your thoughts out there and getting some feedback from the people that listen to it, or from the marketplace, if you want, if it is business relating. It's an outlet. I will stick to that word because it was, I think, very, very appropriate as a word. And Adam, based on all the discussion we've had so far, if you were to give to the listener now something actionable, something they can take and implement and do, what would you tell her or him?
I think one of the key things that I found really useful for me to figure out the changes I need to make is a journal. So I've kept a journal for decades. I used to use a paper-based journal. Now I use an app. I don't get any kind of referral fees for it, but the app that I use is called Day One, and it's a cloud-based app. So any device that I use and I update it, it's going to be kept in one place. And I put my thoughts down, my reflections, and particularly my emotions. I feel that emotions and imagination is the language of intuition. So as you write these down, you can start seeing the patterns, but you rarely see the patterns in the moment. Sometimes you have to look from a wider perspective and say, I felt anxious then, I felt anxious then, what did it have in common in all these cases? And then you get to evaluate some of your own triggers or your own belief systems. And once you know it, you can change it. But a lot of the time, we're walking around with these kind of belief systems that we don't know, and these fears and anxieties and these triggers that we don't really comprehend. And in many ways, we're robots that are kind of responding to the environment around us. With a journal, you can play detective in your own life, and then you can start making changes. So and you don't even need to see a therapist a lot of the time. Sometimes you can just look at your own thoughts and then challenge your own belief systems and say, well, I believed that then. Do I still believe it now? No. Okay. And then sometimes that's all it takes to change a belief. But if it's a belief that was created at a point of real emotional intensity, if someone was raped or attacked or, bullied or something like that, that's probably going to be a deeper belief system tied in with a protective coping mechanism. Probably better to see a therapist in situations like that. But if you just have, let's say, beliefs that are just no longer useful, seeing them in a journal, challenging them, and then thinking, is it still useful to believe that? Or is it more useful to believe something else? Sometimes that's all it takes to change a belief system. And one belief that changes can be life-changing. So I'd say keep a journal and reread what you've written is probably my actionable tip.
Beautiful advice. I've kept a journal for years as well. I still write it on paper because I love the pen and paper style, but I'm a big proponent of examining one's life and evaluating. Adam, thank you. I have a couple of quick fire questions to wrap this conversation up, before I ask them, where would you direct the listener who would like to find out more about you and what you do, and your podcast, of course?
Sure. So, I mean, if you wanted to hear my podcast, I have two podcasts, one called Modern Mindset with Adam Cox and the other called The Hypnotist. You can find all of them on all of the podcast platforms. But if you actually wanted to hear let's say a particular audio download, just because you're listening to this recording right now, I try and create as much value as possible. Normally I sell my hypnosis downloads for £10 each. But if you were to go to my website, which is 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏.co.uk, click the downloads tab, and then you can download whatever you want. If you use the coupon code FREE, just get that free. And it doesn't have to be one or two. You can download 10 if you want, and then you're getting £100 worth of downloads completely free. Like I say, I'm not doing this for the money, so I don't mind if you get my content free, my downloads free. I just want to feel like I'm making a difference in other people's lives. So 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏.co.uk, use the coupon code FREE, and then just get what, you can actually hear me in action. You can hear my audio then.
Perfect. They will be in the show notes for you to find and click on them. Adam, some final quick fire questions then to wrap things up.
Sure.
And my first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
What it means to me is evolving, being a slightly different version of yourself. So it doesn't mean changing who you are. It means evolving who you are. And when I think of the version I used to be, when I was this anxious, kind of isolated person, at some level, I feel like I'm completely different. I'm still the same person, but I'm just a different version of me. And that's what personal development means to me. It's kind of being not the perfect version of you, but just kind of an evolving version of you.
Thank you. And hypothetically, if you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
I would say, at 18 years, it was just before I kind of became a recluse. And the advice that I would give myself is there is lessons in pain. There is lessons in misery. And I didn't realize it at the time. It was only afterwards. A lot of people try and avoid pain. They try and avoid discomfort. They try and avoid, tough times. That's where the learning is. Mm-hmm. And if you can extract the value from the worst times, then, the uncertainty of any situation doesn't faze you, because one of my life lessons, my mantras is I either win or I learn. So I'm not afraid of making decisions, because if things happen the way I want them to, I'm going to win. I'm going to get the outcome I want. And if they don't, I'm going to learn something which still makes me better. And that feeling that whatever happens, I can't lose, makes me unafraid to make decisions.
Fantastic. And what's one book that you recommend to the listeners based on the topic today?
Yeah, there's so many great personal development books. I would say just, probably a book that hasn't been, I could say Think and Grow Rich and Awaken the Giant Within, and they've probably already been mentioned before. The one I'm going to recommend is one of the great hypnotherapists is Milton Erickson. Mm-hmm. And one that really inspired me was a book called Magic in Action. And it was the actual transcripts of Milton Erickson doing real hypnosis with real clients and changing their life. Mm-hmm. And when I read that book, I got the chills. And I think if I didn't read that book, I wouldn't be a hypnotherapist now. So it probably hasn't been recommended by the other guests before, but Magic in Action, real transcripts by one of the great hypnotherapists, Milton Erickson, would be my choice.
Thank you. No, it has not been mentioned before. Adam, I want to thank you very much for your time today, for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us today. I want to wish you all the very best with what you do and this impact that you're making in the world. So all the very best. Any last parting words?
No, it's just been an absolute honor, privilege to be on your show. Thank you so much. And I would just say one last thing to your listeners. So much work goes into building a podcast. So the fact that you're listening to this, don't take it for granted, because there's a lot of podcasters that give up. So the fact that you're listening to this, shows that, Aggie is doing something very special.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you got great value from today's episode. And if you'd be so kind, please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcasts review, sharing how personal development mastery has made a difference to you today. And I will read the review in the podcast. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in,